Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a tag video. This is the best books you've never heard of tag and was originated by Danica Lee Ellis. I first saw it on Brian at Bookish's channel. I wasn't tagged, but I thought it was a fantastic tag, and it's based on sort of ratings in Goodreads, not whether it's 5 stars or 1 star, but the number of ratings books have been given. And I'll post a screenshot of where you go to do this, because you can organise how your read books are arranged in Goodreads. And there's a way of doing it, so it will do it in order of descending or ascending most popular books in terms of numbers of ratings. And so here's that. And there are a series of prompts which I'm going to read all together and answer one or two directly, but really it's an excuse to talk about books that I've read and loved that have very, very few ratings, don't seem very popular. So I'm just going to talk about those in general, which sort of meet some of the prompts, but I just wanted to do as a sort of general conversation. So the prompts are there many books that you've read that are below 250 ratings? So I've actually got some stats for this. For books that I've read that have got 250 ratings or less, up to 100, for between 250 and 100, I've got 220 titles. For books that have 100 ratings or less, I've got 144 further titles. And then for books that have 25 ratings or less, I have 64. And then 10 ratings or less, I've got 29, although quite a lot of those are self-published books by friends, so that's slightly inflated that target. Okay, prompt 2 is, how did you hear about the most obscure books you read? I can never answer questions about where do I find information out about my books, because I'm not signed up to any lists. I don't have dealings with publishers. All I can say is it's organic, that somehow reading a book by an author I love somehow in the ether leads me to other books that may sort of be similar in theme or idea or scope or whatever, and I just somehow I find out about them. I can't explain it any more than that. Prompt 3 is, what are some of your favourite unknown under 250 ratings books that you've read, and why should more people read them? That's going to be the bulk of this video. I'll come back to that. 4, any other thoughts? And for example, do you think the most popular books you've read are usually better than the least popular ones? Not necessarily. I ought to say that, the stuff I read in the main is not the mass market sellers. I tend to read the more lesser favoured stuff anyway, because that's my wheelhouse, that's what I'm interested in, and that's what I write about. But within each of those categories, there are good books and bad books and meh books. So I can't say that one category, i.e. experimental, is better across the board than more conventional novels. I am more likely to be interested in them, but that's not the same as a sort of value judgment on whether they're better or worse. Why do you think your least read books are so unknown? Well, I'll talk about those in the individual cases when we come to them. Do you like reading unknown books or popular books better? Well, I've sort of answered that. My natural preference is for books that are off the mainstream, mainly in formalistic terms or linguistic terms. So that's what I would always gravitate first towards, rather than a popular book. Do you want to read more obscure books? Well, that's a bit of a silly question. For me, it's not about the obscurity. It's about how far out the book is, how far out there the book is in terms, as I say, of linguistics or formalism. I think I've covered a lot of the ground where you have experimental writers producing this sort of stuff, but I'm sure there are areas and writers that I'm unaware of. And, I'm always in the market, always up for reading and discovering new works and new authors. I will put a plea out here that there's a book, I think, by a Balkan writer, where the 2 pages, right and left, are exactly the same. So they're not even mirror images, they're just reproductions of each other. But somewhere in the book, one of the where is it? One of the right-hand pages has a paragraph or a word or something that's different. I'm really keen to read that. So if anyone can supply me what that book or who that author is, I'd be very grateful. I'm pretty sure Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse first mentioned this book or this author. And for the life of me, I can't find it, scrabbling back through his back catalogue. So, Jason, if you see this, can you help me out? Or if anyone knows what this book is I'm talking about, please let me know. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the actual books. So, the first section of books is 250 ratings or less, between 250 and 100. And as I say, I had 220 of my titles fitted into that. The first is I don't have it because I lost it to my mould outbreak, which is William Burroughs' Our Pook is Here. And it's a tragedy that I lost it because it's actually worth a lot of money now, the edition I had. Because when I looked to come to replace it, it was about 75 quid or something, or even more than that, which I wasn't prepared to pay. I mean, it's not one of Burroughs' best, to be honest. It's one of those sort of, it's not really a novel and it's not really non-fiction. It sort of falls between the stools of the two. It's not great, but yeah, I loved having it because I was a Burroughs completist. I had all his books at the time, and it's gone. I'm surprised that any Burroughs book rates less than 250 ratings. There's a second one we'll get to later, which does make more sense to me. That does. But Our Pook is Here was part of his oeuvre. Been around a long time. I'm surprised that rate's so low on Goodreads. The next one is Magnetic Fields by Rod Lowenson. And this is a fabulous little book. Of all the books, I think, other than maybe one other that I'm going to talk about as being underappreciated or, underread, I was surprised that I thought this was a sort of a modern or postmodern classic. I thought it was really well known. And there's a band named after this book after all. But no, apparently not. Under 250 ratings. It's really good. I highly recommend it. Another one is Atta by Jarrett Kobek, published on the cult in press that is Semi or Text, which is run by Chris Kraus. And a lot of these books I have separate videos for talking about them at greater length, including this one. This is about Mohammed Atta, who's the ringleader of the 9/11 plane hijackers, and it's an extraordinary work. Sort of split into alternative chapters where one is first person singular and the others are third person singular. But it's just a brilliant character study. It really gets you inside the mind of this guy and the tensions and contradictions within his life. It's hard to know how accurate it is in terms of the real guy, because obviously the real guy is dead. But this is a supreme work of profiling of an individual psyche and a supreme work of literature, which is what Jarrett Kobek is not really known for. He's a bit more sort of knockabout author, but this is superb. And I'll post the link to my full in-depth review of it. Only Americans Burn in Hell by the same author, Jarrett Kobek. This was his latest, came out a couple of years ago. And I can understand this not being so well read because Jarrett Kobek couldn't get it published in America because Jarrett Kobek is very critical of America and both its established politicians and its sort of tech leaders. It's quite sort of misanthropic, but I think I think well targeted. He's particularly good on race as well. He couldn't get this published in America. He had to come to the UK to get it published. So I'm not surprised that it's not that well rated. It's not his best, but it's, he is such a good writer that it's still head and shoulders above most sort of social novelists. It's very funny, very acerbic. It's not a novel, there's not a consistent plot at all, although there are stabs at it being a novel, but Kobek sort of sort of criticises though within the book as well, and his shortcomings of trying to establish a feeble plot. But it's, I wouldn't start with this as your first Kobek. The book to start with Kobek is I Hate the Internet, which was a huge sensation. This is very much in the vein of it, but a bit in its shadow because it's not as good. And then for his serious writing, read Atta. And finally, in the 250 to 100, Belladonna by Dasa Drinjic, a Croatian writer. Now, I read this 2 years ago, maybe last year, I can't remember, and I didn't really get on with it, to be honest. It's about an aged Croatian man and his history through, the history of Yugoslavia. So it's an interesting subject, but I just thought it's a bit postmodern in its style. It's a bit sort of fragmentary, but for a big book, each fragment is actually quite dense and quite long. It just doesn't follow on to the next fragment. That was my problem with it. So I didn't really get on with this. But I thought Dasa Drinjic was a well-known, well-respected, well-established author. I would have thought there would have been more ratings. But there again, if other people felt like I did, maybe that's why. I am going to give her another chance. I have another. All her books, or all her well-known books, are sort of about the same character, and it's the final one that follows this I have, which is called ECG, I think. I will read it one day, but I'm in no rush. Okay, so those are the books that were 100 to 250 ratings. Oh no, I've got some more, sorry. Yeah, I was surprised about the next two. This is A Cemetery in Barnes by, The Cemetery in Barnes by Gabriele Josipovici, and another is called Lucia by Alex Phoebe. I don't have it, it succumbed to the mould. And both of these won the Republic of Consciousness Prize in whichever year they came out. So what does that say about the prize? That both of these have got just over 100 ratings each, which I was really surprised at. They are both good books. They are British postmodernists in style, but they're not sort of heavy postmodernism. They just find their means of expression, which is not a mass market conventional novel. That's all. I liked them both. I wasn't blown away by them both, but as I say, they were both winners of a prize devoted to radical fiction, but nobody reads them. Yeah, I was appalled that this has only got 100 plus ratings. Danny Denton from Ireland, The Early King and the Kid in Yellow. I love this book. The year it came out, it got to my top 5 books of the year. It's so beautifully poetic and lyrical, but about a sort of set of gangsters in a near future dystopian Ireland where it never stops raining, so everywhere is saturated. And the descriptions of the water and the bogginess are brilliant. And because everything's sort of saturated, the economy's gone to shit, hence it's run by gangsters. I love this book. I'm absolutely surprised and appalled that it has so few readers. Please go and read this book. And then I think the other book I mentioned that surprised me the most, that has so few readers, is this. This is Will Self. Okay, Will Self is a writer not to all tastes. He writes modernist work, which are quite dense and quite difficult, but it's still Will Self. He's a well-established writer. And my original review, which I'll post a link to for this book, has had more views than I had subscribers, considerably more views. It's my second most watched video after my review of Milkman by Anna Burns. So I'm really surprised that this has only got, how many? Yeah, again, sort of 100 plus ratings. I can only assume that's because of the edition of this book. This is the first edition, hardback, Penguin. I assume once it's come out in paperback, I haven't yet, that there are a lot more ratings. So that might explain this, because otherwise I'm absolutely bemused why this has only got 100 ratings. I will say that all of my books have under 100 ratings, but obviously I know my sales figures. So for Three Dreams in the Key of G, which I think has about 19 ratings, also has a to be read by about 140 people, something like that. I know how many that sold, and it's considerably more than 19. So does one deduce, therefore, that readers of Will Self's Phone and my book are not good readers, members? It's possible. I don't know. Okay, so now we come on to the books that have got 100 or less ratings, between 100 and 25. And of those, this is Three Wogs by Alexander Theroux, which I read this year, and it's a provocative book. And Alexander Through maybe is a bit of a cult author anyway. I mean, he doesn't publish prolifically because he takes such time because of the language that he sort of works with. Very ornate, very baroque. So he doesn't publish that frequently. This was his first book, I think, or a very early one of his books. And the remarkable thing is, it's a study of British racism in the 1960s and 70s. But Thoreau himself is American. And what's astounding is that he almost never slips up in his use of language, in his understanding and analysis of British culture, of the unique personification of British racism, which is, say, different to racism in the States, although they share some features. It's an extraordinary work, but I think Thoreau is a bit obscure. I think the title is off-putting. So I do sort of understand. Also, I'd never heard of this book until Leaf by Leaf reviewed it and made me aware of it. So it might be one of those books that's just totally below the radar, that people aren't aware it exists, let alone that it's worth reading. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Again, Nathalie Sarraute, the use of speech. This is, under 100. She was a member of the Nouveau Roman movement in France, like Rob Grier and other writers. I love this book, but it is quite technical in a way. It's basically several short stories where the writer character is portraying dialogues between people, but we're not interested. She's not interested in the content. She's interested in how the back and forth, what the body language is, what the expressive facial expressions are. So it's quite a sort of technical study of that, So it's just short stories set in, in calves, where she's earwigging on the table next to her, which is a mother and a daughter, I think. It's things like that. So I can understand that this might not be that popular, but if you're at all interested in how humans communicate and interact, definitely worth reading. This transcript, Heimred Bakker, only has 57 ratings, and I think most of those I've provided by recommending this book to people, and people have picked it up and they felt exactly the same as I do. This is an astounding book. It's a work of concrete poetry by an Austrian, and what he does is he provides transcripts, very small fragments from the Holocaust, be it writings on the walls left by inmates, to train timetables, coded messages, Nazi speeches, bureaucratic ordinances to the local police stations, material orders, for supplies to concentration camps, all this sort of stuff. And through it, it just builds up this. The whole point about the Holocaust is the usual response is it is beyond understanding. It's too monstrous. It's too great. This book drags you back to the reality of it, that actually, no, it can be put into words. And the words that were used are bureaucratic, nonsensical, inflated, such as in the speeches of the Nazis, all this sort of thing. It's an extraordinary work. So please do track this down. I've recommended it to lots of people, and so far none of them have come back and sort of said I was off target for that. They've all thought this is extraordinary. I can't say you can love it because of the subject matter, but it is extraordinary work. And I think of all the books I'm going to talk about today, and again I'll post the link to my review of this is the one that you need to read. Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. This is my read of the year so far in 2020, so I'm a bit sad that it's languishing in terms of ratings, but I think it's because it only came out in February, and obviously once COVID hit, it might have got kind of lost in that, but 5 stars, possible will end up my book of the year come December, I don't know. Really inventive, but also a beautiful, poignant study of parenting and a lesbian relationship at the heart of it, with what it says, thought experiments. So each chapter is starts off with a explanation of a philosophical or a thought experiment, and how the brain works, how we perceive, all that sort of stuff. Can animals? What's the difference between the way animals think and the way that humans think? All that stuff. Wonderful. I loved it. Please go read it. Ah, yes, the Revised Boy Scouts Manual by William Burroughs. This is the second Burroughs one I've included. This is 100 Under, but I think the reason for this is it's not well known. I myself didn't know this existed. So basically, this came out a couple of years ago. It's been compiled from Burroughs' public speaking events, literally transcribed from tapes of recordings of some of his events. And was released in 2019. So, many years after Burroughs had died, and we all assumed there was no more to come. So no one, I wasn't looking for new Burroughs publications. Not quite sure how I happened on this, but when I did, I was very glad. I bought it, and it's really good. It's a really good place to start. If you've never read Burroughs, this is a good place to start because all his ideas, or the core of all of his ideas, is contained in here. And if you read this and then go on to read the more esoteric treatment of some of those ideas in his novels, I think you'll be well grounded to be able to tackle those novels, which are difficult works. This is not difficult. This is very, very good. And then the book that makes me the saddest, because this is my favourite book, or second favourite book of all time. This is not a novel, and Other Stories by David Markson, has 68 ratings. I think, again, possibly, because this is a trilogy of novels, it could be that the individual novels themselves have more ratings. Again, I haven't looked. But this is such a wonderfully subversive book on the concept of what a novel is. I've talked about this at length in many different media, including podcasts and stuff. I'm just going to post links to it. But this is my number 2 book of all time. And on other days, it's my number 1 book of all time. So I was very distraught. But as I say, in mitigation, it might be that the individual 3 novels in here might have more ratings. I don't know. Okay, so now we come to... are we there yet? Yeah. So now we come to books with 25 or less ratings. This is the really sad area. 64 of my titles this applied to. So the first is Playing Possum by Kevin Davey, which was published 2017, but it's a very small public. This is, if you can see that, it's ARG Press. So it's unknown to me. I've never heard of them. I don't know if they've published anything else. I was recommended this by a Goodreads reader who doesn't have a BookTube channel, called Jonathan Poole. It's one of his favourite reads of the year that he read it in. And it is very good. It's about T.S. Eliot. It's a sort of speculative fiction as what happens if T.S. Eliot had killed his wife and gone on the run. And but it's done in a sort of postmodern style. But it is good. But I'm not surprised. I think it's one of those books that just people have never, I've never heard of Kevin Davey. I've never heard of ARG Press. So if Jonathan Poole hadn't pointed it out to me, I never would have come across this book. And then we come to a bunch of books which are definitely American post-modern fiction from not even the height of the movement, which is the 60s, where you had Barthelme, Barthes, Robert Coover. This is the next generation, so the sort of 80s onwards. 3 books by Curtis White, Anarcho-Hindu, Lacking Character, which came out a couple of years ago, and Requiem. And I love all 3 of these, particularly Requiem. I read Lacking Character this year because, again, I didn't know it had come out because Curtis White had sort of proclaimed publicly he'd retired from writing. And then this came out, so I hadn't heard of it until this year, and I'm very glad that he's still at it. And in similar vein, Ronald Suchanek, Mosaic Man, another American postmodern writer. I really love this. I mean, it's a pun. Mosaic Man is both literally a mosaic of a single individual, all the different things that go out to make his character, but also mosaic as in a Jew, a man of Moses, a follower of Moses. So I really enjoyed these, but, late postmodernism doesn't seem to rate readers on Goodreads, or if it does rate readers, they're not on Goodreads, or they're not the type who can be bothered to do anything but say read. So, I kind of understand that. And now we come on to the saddest category of all, 10 ratings or less, which I had 29 books. As I say, a lot of those were self-published by mates, so I'm not going to... Also, I read them all on Kindle, so I don't have them anyway. The first of these is Alphabet City by Stephen Knight, which I'm surprised at and I'm not surprised at. Stephen Knight is the guy who writes Peaky Blinders. He came out with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So he's made huge amounts of money and had huge success in media other than literature. But he started writing books. So this was written in, or published in 1995. And it's great. I mean, I really like it. But it's not what he's known for. Very quickly, he seemed to have left literature behind and got on to bigger and better things. So I can kind of understand that you know, people haven't read this. It's basically a guy who fakes a sociology study of Alphabet City, New York, a sort of crime-ridden area of, sort of drugs and everything. And the events that he made up, you know, he never even set foot there. The events that he made up in his publication start coming true. And he gets drawn more and more into the web of what's going on. It's brilliant. It's really, really good. But no one's read it. Intimate Cartographies, L.A. Alexander. I can't say much about this book because I've read it and can't remember a blasted thing about it other than it has lots of maps and stuff in it. And it's Intimate Cartographies. It's the sort of map of love, obviously, but, in a woman who finds it very hard to feel and express love. So it's quite obscure, I guess. I'm going to reread it. I keep saying I'm going to reread it, but because I limit myself to 2 rereads a year, it never gets to the top of that pile. But I do want to reread it because I remember enjoying it at the time, but I just can't remember anything about it. But I'm not surprised that it's obscure. This one shocked me. William Astor's Lonesome Wife by William Gass. This is a brilliant book. Maybe people get put off by the cover, but basically it's a seductive voice to the reader. And the seduction is as if a female, but it's really the book. The book is trying to entice you to delve further into its pages. And that is the central metaphor. And it's funny, it's clever, it's subversive, it is sort of postmodernist and all that. But it's great. I'm really surprised that no one's read this. Next one. My Madness, the selected writings of Anna Kavan. Again, I can only assume this is an edition issue. That, you know, Anna Kavan is a name that keeps coming up in terms of people discovering her or rediscovering her. This edition contains the wonderful science fiction short story called Ice, which is also published as a standalone. So probably a lot of people have read Ice as a standalone short story. She's a fantastic writer, and only last week, Leaf by Leaf was talking about her. I've had this book for many, many years. Let's see, when was it published? 1990. So again, I think it's more a case of other editions. So her ratings numbers are split between these other editions. I mean, I hope that's the reason, because Kavan is definitely worth reading. And finally, 2 non-fiction books. I'm not surprised that these have so low ratings because they are a bit sort of specialist. This first is called Literary Activism, a Symposium, which does what it says on the tin, that there was a symposium over a weekend or a week. Lots of writers considering like sort of writing from outside the Western canon and publishing from outside the Western canon, particularly the Indian subcontinent. The issues there, the politics of it, the sort of lost voices and lost languages of Indian tradition. But it's not just centred in India. It's the meeting of East and West publishing. And it was really good. I got a lot out of it. But it is a bit of a specialist audience, I feel. But, you know, I got a lot out of it. And the other, this was my non-fiction read of the year last year, Sound, Art and Metaphysics, Sonic Flux by Christopher Cox. I actually think this book is name-checked in Valeria Luiselli's The Lost Children Archive. I think it's one of the books in the boxes. Can't remember if it's the Mothers or the Fathers now. I think it was the Mothers. And it's superb. I mean, it's a fantastic treatment of the science of sound. And then it goes into all the sort of sound artists from the turn of the 20th century onwards, which I wasn't particularly familiar with. I'd heard of some of the names, but it was a really good sort of review of as I say, that sphere of art, of sound art. But you know, again, it's maybe a bit sort of niche. But you know, I love this book, but it has under 10 ratings. So there you have it. That's my take on the tag. So in terms of tagging some people to do it, let's have the Weird Book book club, because I'm sure you have some very, very obscure and underappreciated books. Let's have Jason over at Byways in Booklands, because he's a book collector, so he is going to have more obscure books than anybody else. A lot of them will be sort of occult and that type of stuff. Let's have Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. And Kelly, his wife, let's have her as well, or they could do a joint one. And Celia over in Norway. Celia, let's see what your lesser appreciated books in your collection are. That'd be interesting.